Well, here we go. I'm very honored to be here to talk with you today. Congratulations on your big win last night. How are you feeling today?
I feel great, Linda. Thank you. I truly do. It's a real privilege to be sitting here today as the person chosen to be the Democratic nominee to run for governor here in this incredible state. And it's an amazing place in my personal journey, considering where I started from, to be sitting here today in such a privileged position and to have the opportunity to talk about something that matters very deeply to me, public education.
And education was obviously a huge part of your personal journey, and I know part of the reason why you're so passionate about this.
It is. Of course, my education and the path that it provided for me to a better life is a story that I want to make sure every Texas child can tell. And it's a lot harder today for young people in Texas to be able to tell the same kind of story, coming from a place of real personal struggle and hardship to a place of having the privilege of being a voice for other people has been an amazing journey for me. But in Texas today, we know that there are young people who want that same opportunity, who deserve a 21st century education to equip them to be a part of our 21st century economy, and yet who aren't getting the kind of support and help that they need to be a part of that. Children who are willing to work really, really hard and who I think believe in the dream that I believed in, that if you work hard, you ought to be able to achieve anything.
As you know, our state has become very popular. We have about 1,200 new residents in the state of Texas every single day. That comes with some blessings, some positives, but also some challenges. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are based on the population boom that we're experiencing, what your thoughts are as it relates to public education and the resources that will be needed for these new residents that are coming to our state.
Well, it's both a challenge and an opportunity. I was in the Valley this last weekend for Charo Days, and I was reminded of something I had been told several months ago, and that is in a certain area of that community, every month, an entire elementary school of children are born. 800 births a month.
Every month.
And so what we see there, of course, is an incredible opportunity for us to create the future workforce, the future leaders of this state. But if we leave them behind, if we don't equip them with the kind of educational tools that they need to be a part of the great story that is Texas, not only are we failing them and the opportunity that they each deserve, but we're failing our state in the long term.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about where we are in terms of school finance. As Senator Watson alluded to in his introduction, you of course are known for your filibuster in 2011, in which there were $5.4 billion in education cuts, ultimately went through, led to the current pending legislation on school finance, where 2/3 of our school districts are now suing. So tell us, from your perspective, what have been the impact, or what has been the impact of those cuts?
It's been personal, and it's been more widespread too. On the personal level, of course, we have children that are in classrooms today where there are simply too many kids to get the kind of attention that they deserve. We have teachers that are being required and expected to perform and produce outcomes with these kids where they haven't been given the appropriate resources and tools to be able to do that. And we know that many programs that were working really well in Texas were cut. Over 11,000 teaching positions went either unfilled or there were actual pink slips given out. So across the state of Texas, we lost some extraordinary talent that was willing to be a part of moving our kids into the 21st century economy. And the programs that were cut were some of the ones that were most important in helping the kids who need help the very most. We had begun to move in the direction of full-day pre-K in Texas, not filling the need by any stretch of the imagination, but we were demonstrating our vision and trying to get there as a state. And unfortunately, with the cuts, those programs went unfunded. A lot of school districts dug deep or they asked their local property taxpayers to give more so that they could continue their full-day pre-K programs because they understood the importance of what that was doing to help equalize children as they're coming into our classrooms and to be more prepared to learn. We also lost some programs that were really trying to reach those kids that were falling through the cracks. A program called the Student Success Initiative, which was reaching out to high school students who are really struggling and giving them much more one-on-one attention. That program was cut dramatically. So very real human impacts occurred here. Kids who will be moving through the system and who we won't be able to go back and get if we don't get with it really quickly and turn that around. I'm very pleased that in the last legislative session, though we started with a budget that only added back $1 billion toward those cuts, a budget that I voted against when it first came out on the floor, we were able to work together in a bipartisan way and ultimately get to the end of the session with $3.4 billion of the cuts being restored. It's not nearly where we need to be, but it at least is part of the way back to where we once were.
So you mentioned the pre-K programs, the full-day pre-K programs. Tell us a little bit about what your proposal is, as I know you've got a 4-plank plan for education, and part of that is pre-K, full-day pre-K education. So tell us a little bit about that, and also how you're going to pay for it, where the money for that is going to come, and if some of that $3.4 billion that was restored is going to help in that regard.
Sure. Well, my education platform, as I've laid it out, is in 4 planks. One of those is directed specifically at early childhood education, asking that we set a vision for full-day pre-K for every 4-year-old in the state of Texas, but not just stopping with that. Also working to make sure that we have kids, as many as possible, I hope 100%, reading on grade level by the time they get to 3rd grade, because we know that if they're not, we're likely to lose those kids forever. We're likely to see them not complete school or to complete but not do as well as they could have. So that early intervention, that one-on-one focused learning that needs to occur requires, of course, not just a classroom that's not too crowded. It requires teacher aides and getting them back in the classroom. We lost, most of the teacher aide positions as part of those cuts, giving the one-on-one kind of reading attention that our young people demand and deserve. The cost of that is one that I think is certainly worth the outcome that we see with it. And I know that within existing resources today in the state of Texas, we can make that possible. We just have to set our priorities in the right place. When we go back into the legislative session in 2015, we will go back with surplus revenue in place because our comptroller has once again pretty dramatically underestimated what our revenue growth was going to be. We have a great story to tell in Texas about what's happening with our revenue. The question for us as legislators will be, what will our priorities be for the use of those funds? And is there a way for us to make sure that we're setting every child on the path towards success, giving every child a 21st century education for the 21st century economy that they're going to be asked to be a part of?
And of course, in the middle of all of this is the ongoing, seemingly never-ending debate on school finance in our state that goes back decades. And all of the back and forth about the rich school districts and the poor school districts. I'm talking 20 years ago now when that was more of the focus, the whole issue of local control. Give us a little snapshot of where the pending litigation stands right now and your perspective on what we ought to be doing in the school finance arena.
Well, first of all, let me start by painting a clear contrast between our next choice for governor here in this state. While I stood and fought those cuts back in 2011, filibustered them, sadly only to be called back in a special session for them to go forward anyway, my opponent, Greg Abbott, is in court defending those cuts. And this is his second time in just a 2-year period of time to be in the courtroom defending what I think is indefensible. When we were entering this last legislative session, there had already been a decision by the judge, a decision made from the prior trial. 600 school districts in Texas, plaintiffs in this suit. And the judge had ruled that we were not meeting our constitutional obligation to provide a free and effective system of public education in Texas. And he even gave a little hint at how much he thought it was going to take for us to get there in terms of what our state investment in our young people needed to look like. And yet, when we came back into the legislative session, not once did we hear from our state attorney advising us on the path we ought to take to try to get that suit settled. So here we are again. The trial reconvened. The judge took new evidence about some of the changes that had been made, some of the new resources that were added, but also some changes that we made in the accountability system. And he's considering what his decision will be now. So it's likely that at some point in time in the not too distant future, we'll hear what his opinion is. I expect that part of what he'll talk about is this outdated funding formula that we have for funding our public schools in Texas. When I was a young teenage mom, that funding formula was in place. My daughter is a grown woman now, and we're literally still looking at the same formula that was in place way back then. A funding formula that has not kept pace with the actual demands and needs of kids in our school district and hasn't kept pace with understanding the unique challenges that some of our school districts are facing, but also how we could turn those challenges into incredible opportunities. Dual language programs is a perfect example of where we're not putting the kind of focused resources that we ought to.
What do you think should replace the current school finance system?
Really what we need to do is simply go in and adjust the formula. The way schools are funded in Texas is based on a system of weights, where students who are greater challenges, either because they excel and they need attention paid to them because they're above average, or students who are struggling. These schools get a certain weight based on the extra effort that it takes to address the needs of that student. If a school has a large student population of non-English speaking students, there's a weight that's given. But we've not gone back and asked whether these still make sense in the Texas of today. And we've not gone back and asked whether these are going to be the tools that move us forward into a 21st century education. One of the planks that I'll be unveiling, my final plank in the next couple of weeks, is going to talk specifically about how we focus our funding efforts and creating incentives for school districts so that they'll be encouraged to do things in an innovative way. Again, to point back to my experience in the Valley this weekend, I met with a couple of panels of women's leaders in Farr and in Brownsville while I was there. And they were both very proudly telling me about some of the digital technology in the classroom that they had been able to implement there. Again, digging deep into their own local property taxpayer dollars in order to accomplish that. But these are the kind of innovative approaches that we need to reward, and our formula should reflect that.
Speaking about the issue of local control, which has long been debated, as you know, last night Greg Abbott said that we need to give schools in the state genuine local control. So I guess my question to you is, what is your idea of local control, and how does that play into your education proposal?
Well, you know, the folks who have been on the inside of things for a long time at the state capitol today, including Greg Abbott, tend to use the words local control, but typically that's code for local cost. What's been happening at the state level is that we've pushed the cost of our responsibilities down to the local level, so that the percentage of providing an education for our children that the state was once providing is declining, while the percentage that's collected at the local level is rising. In my time in the Texas Senate, I served 2 terms on the Public Education Committee. I was removed from the committee last session. I hazard a guess that it had to do something with my filibuster in the public education cuts. But I continued to go. I went to literally every public education committee hearing. I sat on the dais. I asked my questions, as I always had, because this issue is so deeply important to me. But part of my work in that arena has involved making sure that we do respect local control and that we understand that unique communities have unique challenges and opportunities within their student population, and that we should be deferential to that. At the very least, we shouldn't be forcing unfunded mandates on our schools. And in my experience in the Texas legislature, that's what this leadership has been up to.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit now about some of the somewhat alarming statistics that have come out about the state of education in Texas. Steve Murdoch, as you know, is a former state demographer and currently is professor of sociology at Rice University, and he has written an eye-opening book called Changing Texas: Implications of Addressing or Ignoring the Texas Challenge. We actually had him on our show, Red, White, and Blue, in Houston not too long ago, and his statistics are quite eye-opening. So here are a few of them, and I'm going to then ask you to comment. According to Mr. Murdoch, we are 31st in the nation when it comes to average teacher salary. We spend less per student than Alabama and 40 other states. We are 50th in percentage of the population with a high school degree. And despite the ever-rising demand for higher skills, by the year 2050, the percentage of Texans with a bachelor's degree is actually projected to go down from 25.8% to 24.4%. So given all of that, a lot of daunting challenges there. How does your education plan address these? And I'm going to ask you to start specifically with teachers.
Absolutely. Well, in my four-plank platform, one of those does specifically address our teaching community and seeks to, number one, move the average salaries of our teachers up to the nationwide average. That'll take about $7,000 to $8,000 per year per teacher, but it's an investment worth making. Another piece, of course, about making sure that we are respecting our teaching community is giving the professional development to our teachers that they need. We know we have a lot of teachers or teachers' aides who want to move into the teaching arena full-time, teachers who are in the classroom today who want to improve upon their educational experiences so that they can move into a more specialized arena, teachers who are looking to get their master's in education so that they can be qualified to be our next teachers in our early college high schools and our dual credit course loads. We have such demand for excellence in teaching, and it requires of us to think about how we're going to create a pipeline of excellent people who are going into the teaching arena. What my plan calls for is giving a guaranteed place in a Texas university system for anyone who's in the top 20% of their high school and who's willing to commit themselves to an educational degree. Someone who will be given loan forgiveness if they're willing to go into a Texas classroom and give back to Texans based on the great education that they've been provided in a Texas university. These are the kinds of things I think that we need to demonstrate. And what I've observed as a legislator is all too often when we talk about our teachers, we do it in the same way that we talk about our kids. Instead of talking about giving them the tools that they need to be successful, we talk about holding them accountable. Right? We're always on the back end of things, not on the front end of things. And so oftentimes what you'll hear about our teachers is we're going to hold them accountable to the testing scores of their students. But we don't talk about how we're going to make sure that their students have the resources and tools that they need to be successful, and therefore for teachers to be successful. I know that we have an amazing pool of talent, of people who are in the teaching community in Texas today. They certainly are not in it because of the money. They're certainly not in it because they're being given all of the resources that they need. They're in it because they love children and they really want to make an impact and a difference in their lives. And I think it's time for Texans to show their respect for what our teachers are doing.
It's interesting. right before we got started today, I had the pleasure of sitting in one of the other sessions right before, and it was teach.org was the session. And it was really interesting to hear the conversation. And part of what teach.org is trying to do is to change the conversation and change the perception of the teaching profession. Very interesting comments about trying to making the teaching profession just like any other career in medicine or in corporate America, where you start with a novice level teacher who is then exposed to a master teacher around whom they can ask questions and watch them perform in the classroom, and then you can sort of work your way up to become a master teacher. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And I just would like to know what you think about that concept and the whole idea of just changing the perception of the teaching profession so that our teachers would be lifted and compensated accordingly.
Well, I think it's a fabulous concept. And, there was a time in America where teachers were revered. They truly were. And they were seen as the professionals that they are. But that hasn't been the case in certainly the last few decades. And in large part, I think we've abandoned our responsibility to making sure that the folks who are being asked to do the most important job in this country are people who are paid well to do it and are given the resources and tools that they need to do it well. I can't imagine when I was a lawyer graduating from law school as a baby lawyer being just thrown out there without the guidance of other folks who I could learn from over the years and to improve upon my legal skills. And we should expect no less and provide no less for our teachers. The idea of making sure that we're helping every teacher become their best is incredibly important. I taught one class at TCU, one semester. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. And it gave me new respect for the work that our teachers are doing and what it takes to put a lesson plan together and what it feels like to be thrown into the deep end of the ocean. And I know there are teachers who really have talent and want to improve on their talent, and I love the idea of teach.org and what its focus is. I think it's exactly what we need to be doing.
It's so interesting. The moderator in that session recounted a story about someone saying that teaching is not rocket science, it's actually harder.
Yes.
And there was an actual rocket scientist who was in the audience when that comment was made. And then the rocket scientist said, "I'm here to tell you I had to teach and it was the hardest thing I ever had to do, and I am a rocket scientist." So I loved that. I thought that was so great. I thought it was just terrific. I want to get back to your idea about guaranteeing a place for teachers in the classroom for the top 20%. Logistically, realistically, how do you make something like that happen? That sounds like a very big thing to make happen.
Well, I wish I could take credit for the idea, but it's actually already happening in Texas. It's happening in Arlington, where the University of Texas at Arlington, working in cooperation with the Arlington Independent School District, has created this program. So we know that it's a practical one because it's already on the ground and working. And yes, of course, it creates a new challenge, but we have to be willing to think outside the box and be visionary about how we're going to get to the place that we need to get to in education.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about some statistics, because of course, part of our American dream is that the next generation is going to do better than the generation that preceded them. Yet, Murdoch comes to some frightening conclusions that if we keep the status quo and do nothing to invest in education, here's what we can look forward to. The Texas labor force as a whole will be less well-educated, work in lower status occupations, and have lower incomes in the year 2050 than in the year 2010. He says Texas will be poorer with less income, higher poverty rates, lower net worth, and fewer assets, and will have housing that is of lower value. And that by 2050, 53.1% of Texans will have a high school education or less, and that's up from 48% in 2010. So talking about how we're going to increase the number of high school graduates who go on to college, if you could expand a little bit upon your proposal and how you plan to address some of these issues.
Sure. I think, you know, when you listen to Steve Murdoch, and I've been following him for the last few years, he's been talking about this in depth for some time. And of course, his book was just published. His statistics are like a splash of cold water in the face. They mean something. They're more than just numbers. Behind them are human beings who are being left behind. And it doesn't just hurt them, it hurts us as a state if we don't do something. Texas can't risk standing still. And I think that's the real choice that we're going to have going forward in this 2014 election. Will we stand still? Will we stay with the status quo? Or will we elect someone who's going to set this as our #1 focus priority and understand that where we read all of these statistics and we see incredible challenges behind them, what really lies behind them is an incredible opportunity to do something fantastic. We have a burgeoning population. We have an opportunity to create an incredible talent pool here. But we've got to move. We've got to advance innovative ideas and really put our focus on education in order to accomplish that. One of my planks talks about how we'll take our young people, our high school students, and move them into higher education and the aspiration for higher education. And I can just tell you, as a first-generation college student myself, I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to aspire to that. I wanted it, but I didn't really know how to make it a reality for myself. Community college made it ultimately a reality for me. But what I see happening in South Texas, again, to use it as an example, at South Texas College, they have more early college high school programs than anyone else in the state and almost anyone else in the country, and they're looked at as an exemplary model of how to do it. And what they're able to achieve by setting their focus there is the graduation of high school students who are either graduating from high school already equipped to be part of our 21st century workforce through some vocational or technical training that they've gotten, or they're graduating students who are well on their way to the first part of their college education for free. That's the most remarkable thing. They're doing this in cooperation with the public school system there in a way that's providing this with no cost to the student. We know there are two huge hurdles for students to get into college. One, I talked about a moment ago, just the understanding of how to do it. And this is laying the groundwork for them in a very powerful way. The other real challenge, and it's not just for low-income students, it's for middle-income students more and more. The cost of college has become an impediment that a lot of students are not able to overcome. We have so many who are graduating with burdening student debt. They've taken out loans for a full 4 years, and how wonderful it would be instead for our students to be able to earn as many college credits as possible while they're in high school to lessen that cost when they go forward. That effort, in conjunction with this early childhood effort, I think, you know, the bookends are the two most important pieces of investment that we can make as a state. And what I find really compelling about Steve Murdoch's study is that after he goes through this enormous amount of data and some fairly sobering statistics, his ultimate conclusion is that if Texas does one thing and only one thing, we should and must invest in early education. And if we do that, we have not just a challenge on our hands, we have a real opportunity on our hands in terms of a workforce that's not going to demonstrate a lower earning capacity, but a much higher one, and will become an even greater and stronger economy as a consequence.
You mentioned the ever-rising cost of college education. I happen to be the mother of a sophomore at TCU, so I understand, and I'm sure
Go Frogs,
many
by the
of,
way.
Yes,
Shameless plug for my
yes,
Frogs.
Go Frogs, there we go, okay. And I'm sure many of you in the audience are experiencing the same thing or have been there. It just seems to keep going up and up and up. I wonder what it's going to be when my daughter has children who are ready to go to college. I mean, how much is it going to cost?
Yeah.
What is the answer? How do we put a cap on this? Because all it's really doing is creating more of the haves and the have-nots, if you will, to quote an Oprah show, you know, in our society. So how do we put an end to that?
The state has to step up. The state needs to step up and take responsibility for what it should be doing in the higher education arena, a responsibility that it once owned and did a good job of meeting. In 2003, in a tough budget climate, the state stepped away from what it had considered its responsibility to really make sure that we were helping to cover the cost of college, and it deregulated college tuitions for the first time. It deregulated tuitions, allowing our colleges to raise them in response to determining that it was no longer going to partner in the same way that it once did. That is a failed vision for where we need to go as a state. It was a bad idea then, it's a bad idea now, because it immediately shifted those costs onto students and their parents. The universities will make that up somewhere. And there are some innovative approaches being taken in education to try to lessen those costs. As I said a moment ago, these early college, high school credit programs are a really important part of that. Digital learning is an important part of that, but nothing will ever replace the excellence that one gets in education through a teacher who really reaches you and is able to help inspire you. As a state, we have the resources to invest in our future if we'll only set that as our priority.
When we talk about early college, high school, and you say that it's free for the students who are a part of it, there's no cost involved whatsoever?
The cost is one that's borne by the partnership between the school district and the college. And thus far, it's been one that they've been willing to make a priority, even though it's meant doing without in other arenas. For example, when I was in Brownsville this weekend, they talked about the loss of their fine arts programs. They talked about the loss of the UIL programs that we all probably participated in. I know I did when I was in junior high and high school in Texas. The things that were really helping to create an enriched learning atmosphere. You know, they've had to choose between some things that were really working, unfortunately, but they've set their priority there because they understand that for their students and the challenges that they were seeing, a high number of dropouts, not just in high school, but in 8th grade, because students really didn't see that there was going to be an end of a rainbow for them. They didn't see that there was any reason at all to stay in school. We can do these things together because we know that they're being done. In my own community in Tarrant County College is also entering into a partnership with the with the Arlington ISD and other ISDs to create these same kind of early college, high school programs. So more and more of it is happening. The state needs to speed it up, and the state needs to show that we prioritize that kind of innovation by rewarding it through the support that's needed to help make it happen.
You have been a big proponent and at the forefront of the movement to reduce the number of standardized tests that high school students have to undergo. Talk to us a little bit about your philosophy, why you think that's important and where that fits in your education plan.
I really think that testing should be used for us to understand where a student's strengths and weaknesses lie and where we need to fill the gap. That's the way I was tested when I was coming up in a Texas public school system. The way it's being used today really is, as I said earlier, all about outcome-based examination as opposed to thinking about how we're truly going to create an excellent system of education, a 21st century education for each child in a Texas classroom. And because we're so heavily invested in looking at the back end of it, nothing's being done to make sure that on the front end, we are giving them the tools and the resources that they need to be successful. We dramatically reduced the number of tests in our high schools, down from 15 end-of-year exams to 5, which immediately created a great deal of joy for a lot of high school students across the state of Texas. But it's just the beginning. We know that we've got to go back further. You know, we've got a lot of stress still in the 8th grade arena, and the 5th grade arena, and the 3rd grade arena. And I'm, again, not arguing that we shouldn't know where our students are and be prepared to help them if they're falling through the crack. But we've got to de-emphasize the importance that we're putting on that and the labels that we're putting on students, on teachers, and on schools as a consequence of the existing accountability system that's in place in Texas today.
And so what would you replace those tests with?
Again, I think the most important way to really measure our student performance is to test in order to see where each student is and to determine what we're going to do to move them further. In a typical Texas classroom, you may have someone come into a middle school environment who never really learned how to read because maybe they had some learning disability that went undiagnosed, or maybe they had some real challenges because they don't speak English. These students oftentimes have an excellent experience with a teacher who does dramatic work with them and improves them tremendously. And we see in that student that incredible progression was made. And yet, we don't reward that progression if it hasn't gotten far enough so that on that standardized test on that day, this student is able to demonstrate that they were able to meet the requirements that were there. We have to be more innovative in our thinking about that and reward teachers who we see taking kids from point A to point P and not maybe getting them all the way to Z, but doing something really dramatic in a school year.
There's also the whole concept of making sure that our students know how to think critically.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the role of technology in the classroom and its ability, in many cases, to help students develop that skill.
I think it's very, very important. A blended learning environment where we have the best of both worlds, where we have excellent teachers who are given the digital tools to help provide an excellent classroom experience for our kids is what we all should strive for. It's part of that 4th plank that I'll be laying out. It's part of what I hope we can reward as a state, where we see schools that are innovating and using technology in order to really create a vibrant learning atmosphere for our young folks. I wish that I'd had the opportunity to grow up with that kind of learning capacity surrounding me. The internet didn't even exist. That's how old I am when I was going through school. So it's a real opportunity. We just have to take advantage of it. And we have to make sure that we're helping our schools see that they'll be rewarded where they show real success in that regard.
If you are elected governor, do you see yourself coming up with any sort of technology initiatives that would be incorporated into your plan?
I most certainly see myself embracing the idea of bringing others in who will know how to help us get there. I wish I could tell you that I was the queen of technology, but I can barely press the start button on my laptop computer. I still call it a notebook, and my girls make fun of me for calling it that. But no, not to be silly. Yes, of course, we need to bring the most excellent thinking to the table that will help guide us toward how we're going to take advantage of innovation and technology and make it a vibrant part of what's happening in Texas classrooms.
There was a recent poll by the University of Texas and the Texas Tribune, and it shows that there's a clear public appetite across the aisle for committing more resources to public education. And the most effective changes, according to this poll in public education, would be number 1, increasing funding for public schools, and number 2, reducing the number of standardized tests. And I guess that's why you got the round of applause when you talked about that, because clearly it's something that people are wanting to happen. And here's how some specific proposals also ranked in that poll. And again, this is across both parties. Number 1 is providing incentives for those who choose to go into teaching. That was 76%. increasing teacher pay, 74%, increased funding for public schools, and increased opportunities for online learning. So comments about the poll, and especially about the online learning.
I think it's reflective of everything that I've been hearing in my time in the Texas Senate. There's not a thing there that surprises me. And again, sitting on the Senate Education Committee and hearing the many hours of testimony on a variety of issues in terms of the public education arena in Texas today, these things don't surprise me at all. This is what we hear over and over again. And we sadly just haven't had the vision and state leadership that's made it our focused priority. What you find about Texans is we're willing to invest in what we think is important. We expect our leaders to be responsible in making decisions about how we do that. But I know there are a lot of people who feel like we're failing in that arena, and that we need to step up. And we need to be thoughtful, and we need to be listening to the fact that they are telling us these are sound investments, not just in themselves, their families, their children, but they believe that they're sound investments in terms of taking Texas forward. They want to see us be working on our future, not stuck, standing still where we are today. And that's my hope. I plan to bring that approach to the Texas governor's office when I'm elected.
Okay. You have talked a little bit about the fourth plank of your platform, and I know you don't want to go into too much detail, but I want to ask you to talk a little bit more about some of the collaborative partnership ideas that you have, and kind of whatever you can tell us about the platform at this point without revealing more than you'd like to.
Sure. The idea is to reward collaboration and to reward innovation in the way that we're approaching education and the challenges and opportunities that lie there. And we see some really tremendously good collaborations occurring. As I talked about a moment ago, these collaborations between some of our four-year universities and community colleges with our high schools, helping to give kids a pathway to college. We also see some really good innovation happening in our traditional and our charter school arena. Charter schools, we know, have been both a blessing in the ones that are exemplary, and in some ways a burden in the ones that aren't performing. And I'm very proud to have been part of a bill last session and to have worked very hard on it to open the door for more excellence in that arena, and to more easily close the door when we see a charter school that's failing to perform for our kids. We can't waste a single school year with a child sitting in a classroom where they're not getting the kind of education that they deserve. Charters, of course, were conceived as a place where they would be laboratories of learning excellence, and that laboratory would translate into traditional public schools across the state. I think that's a good approach, the idea that we'll test things out and we'll see what works in both the charter and the traditional arena, and when we do find things that work, we'll make sure that they do communicate and benefit from each other. Spring Branch ISD is showing a great example of that kind of partnership right now, where they have opened up their traditional public schools to combined learning campuses, where they have the presence of charter and traditional public school classrooms in a single campus, getting the best of both worlds for their students, and translating that and transforming their other classrooms as a consequence of what they're learning. Only about 6% of students in Texas today are learning in either the charter, the parochial, or the private school environment. The other 94% are in traditional public school classrooms. So we know we're never going to move everyone into the charter arena overnight, and nor should we want to. But what we should want is where we see excellence occurring, we should want to translate that into every traditional public classroom in the state, so that those other 94% of kids are getting the best of all worlds.
We only have a few minutes left. One thing we haven't touched on is vouchers. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are about vouchers.
I stood and filibustered a $5.4 billion cut to public education. a cut that took resources out of our public school classrooms. I can't support any idea that takes even more resources away from our public school classrooms, and that's what I would do.
As you prepare yourself for these next few months before the election in November, what is it that you want the people of the state of Texas to know most about you, not only as it relates to public education, but as it relates to the future of our state in general?
I want them to know that I'm a fighter. I want them to know that I came into public service because I really do believe in listening to the voices of the people that we represent and creating a system of governance that's reflective of what they care about. I'm willing to stand and fight any day of the week for the hardworking people in this state to help move us into a 21st century public education system so that we succeed in the 21st century economy in Texas. I want to move us forward and to be innovative in the way that we do that. And every single day as our governor, whether it's in the education arena, in the health care arena, in the employment arena, these will be my priorities and my focuses. Standing up for everyday Texans who are working really hard and who deserve to be a part of the promise of Texas, the promise that where you start, and I'm a perfect example of this, should not have anything to do with how far you can go.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Wendy Davis.